Donovan, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm really glad to be here.
Now, I want everyone listening to know Donovan and I are having a hard time from fighting back, cracking up because this is our third attempt to get this podcast recorded. And it was pretty hilarious. We were having this great conversation a few minutes ago. Donovan said, Dave, I don't think you hit record. So we are officially recording, and Donovan's going to share with us his amazing story. So, Donovan, I do want to talk about your shop, and really curious to learn a little bit more about your podcast, Music Retail Podcast, which really, when I started researching doing a podcast, I came across yours, listened to it, loved it, and I said, okay, I want to come up with a different angle. So I appreciate you kind
Yeah,
of.
like if that guy can do it, like I can certainly do it. Yeah.
Well, and you know what? I mean, you're really getting in there and you're talking shop with people. I was like, you know what? I'm going to just try to capture stories. Um, I love the stories that music stores have, especially ones like yours, where I mean, yours isn't multi-generational, but there's this story of the founder, and I don't know, your business is what, like 70, 80 years old. So there's
90
like,
years old this year.
okay, a lot older than you and I.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and maybe older than you and I put together. So tell me
No.
a little bit about Ernie Williamson, the origin story, kind of how it started, and then how you became involved with the business.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll try to condense 90 years of history into a few minute story here. So a little over 90 years ago, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, there was a drummer named Ernie Williamson, and he had a very popular band in the four states area. And Pittsburgh, Kansas, if you're not familiar, which I'm sure you're probably not, is in the southeast corner of Kansas. And there's kind of a metro-ish area that includes like Pittsburgh and Joplin, Miami, Oklahoma, and Northwest Arkansas. It's a four states corridor, four states area of kind of metro sale. So he was playing gigs all over the place, school dances and whatever other things communities would bring in bands. And he had a band called Ernie Williamson and the Syncopators, which if that isn't a band name that screams like 20s and 30s, I don't know what is. And he also played for the circus. There was a military fort nearby that he played in the military band. And so that was kind of his thing. And he was married to a woman named Grace. And then someone stole his bass drum. And so the iconic story goes where someone stole his bass drum. He went to the local music store in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and they didn't have a bass drum, and he needed it for a gig that night. And he just felt like I mean, local music stores should have the gear that local musicians need. And the fact that this store I need to open my own store. So he opened his own store called Ernie Williamson Music, started in Pittsburgh, Kansas in 1935. And at that time, what they were really specializing in were, they had, of course, musical instruments, primarily, band instruments, and they had bass drums and other drums, and they had sheet music. And then I don't know if it was immediately or soon thereafter, they started also selling records. And they became very well known for having little listening booths, and teenagers would come in and pull the records off the shelf and listen to them before they buy them. And it became very well known for that. And then I think in 1941 or somewhere right around there, maybe it's a little bit earlier, Ernie opened a location in Joplin, Missouri. And then over time, they added locations throughout the small towns in Missouri and Arkansas. And I think they had up to 6 locations, primarily still focused on band instruments, print music, and records. Ernie passed away. His wife, Grace, ran the business very successfully for a long time. Matter of fact, Grace was kind of I think a more popular figure in the business even than Ernie was throughout the 60s and 70s. And then she passed away into her 90s, and her daughter Lois ran the business. And Lois ran it successfully up until she sold it to Springfield Music. And Springfield Music was the company that I was working for, based out of Springfield, Missouri. By the time we acquired Ernie Williamson Music, which was around 2003, Lois would have been in her 70s. And they had got rid of the record stalls and actually, the record stalls were still there. They were just using them as like storage closets. But they no longer sold records, but they sold still a ton of print music and did band instrument sales and rentals. And that was really their business. Um, and the story of how we acquired it, I think, is always a fun story to share. So, as I worked for Springfield Music, the former owner of Springfield Music was a man named Lee Coates. And Springfield is about an hour away from Joplin. But we were doing a lot of business with schools in the Joplin area. And so one afternoon, Lee calls me into his office and he says, we're doing so much business with schools down in the Joplin area. We should probably have a store there to better service those schools. Who do you know that would be good? And I knew immediately that Ernie Williamson Music is the place to go. There's about 3 or 4 other music stores in Joplin, but Ernie Williamson has been there the longest, and it's the place that everybody and their grandparents has gone to for generations to get their rental instruments. And I really felt that, especially at that time, that rental market is very mired in like history. And so when people begin, to start with school music, band and orchestra, they tend to go to the place that they know, not necessarily new places. Guitar business, not so much. I think guitars and even lesson studios, people can be attracted by whatever's new or exciting, whatever. But the band and orchestra world's full of tradition. And so at that point, Ernie Williamson was a little bit of a diamond in the rough, but it was the place everybody knew. And I was familiar with Ernie Williamson because I worked for Con Selmer for a few years, and Ernie Williamson Music was one of my accounts. And so I was familiar with it through that. And so Lee told me to call them the next day when I came in and see if they'd be interested. So that evening, I'm driving home, my phone rings, and it's the store manager from Ernie Williamson Music in Joplin. And he says, "Hey, I know this call's out of the blue, but I just wanted to see if you guys might be interested in purchasing our store." And I was taken aback when he said it. I was so surprised that, here I was supposed to call him tomorrow, and here he is calling me now. And so we always just sort of felt like there was a bit of just, fortune that kind of played into that. And so we purchased that business, I believe I think it was around December of 2003. And you fast forward now those 22 years, if back in 2021, we renamed the entire company to Ernie Williamson, and renamed all of our locations under that. We now have 7 locations, and at one point we had like 5 actually, I think 5 or 6 different brand names of stores that we had acquired, and we had all of them running at the same time. And it was so fragmented, and that meant we had 4 or 5 different Facebook accounts, 4 or 5 different Instagram accounts, and 4 or 5 different YouTube channels. It was a nightmare. It was a total marketing mess to try to manage it. And so we ended up consolidating those all down to Ernie Williamson, mainly because it had the longest history. We didn't like the idea of having a business called Springfield Music and trying to have a Springfield Music in Kansas City and a Springfield Music in St. Louis. We thought that was kind of goofy. But with a name like Ernie Williamson, no one else will have it. We know it'll stand apart. The logo that we have for it, we really liked the logo, and it was kind of a fun happenstance how that logo came about, just sort of a fortunate thing. And we love the story of how we acquired it. So by that time, I owned Springfield Music, and so I decided we're just going to go all in. And if I'm being truthful, the other consideration was they already had 2 stores with the Ernie Williamson Music name, and it was much cheaper at that point to rename the other stores to Ernie Williamson Music than to come up with an all-new name and rename all the stores. Because as anyone who's listening to this podcast knows, signage is expensive. So you fast forward to today, and our entire company, 7 locations serving all of Kansas and most of Missouri and even southern Nebraska and bits of some other states, is now under the Ernie Williamson Music banner.
With such the shift to online retail, how does it make sense, or would you be inclined to open more stores, or are you more inclined to lean more into e-commerce?
Yeah, I don't think anymore it makes sense. I would not open a store or buy a store for the opportunity just to do retail in that market. For us anymore, if we acquire stores, it's because either they've got a steady, significant rental business for band and orchestra instruments, or possibly a studio business for lessons. But as a matter of fact, we even have one location. Well, two. We have one location that's like just our warehouse and offices and stuff. But we have another location that's a store location that we really don't even do retail out of. It's really all just school service. And so I think anymore, like the convenience of online retail is just taking over. And we used to always think of ourselves primarily as a brick and mortar retailer that did a little bit of online sales. But as we revamp here for 2025 and for our 90th anniversary, we are literally thinking, all right, we're going to start envisioning ourselves as half online, half brick and mortar. And we're not quite to that number yet in terms of sales being half online, but we're gonna grow to that position because that's where the customer base is going.
What's the from a marketing standpoint, how do you approach your online or how do you approach your marketing for your e-commerce business versus how you approach your marketing for your local brick and mortar stores?
Yeah, marketing is the thing. I think that on one hand, I think there's a few pieces we do pretty well with, but I think there's other pieces that we're perennially challenged by. And so for the online space specifically, we've really focused. We have a significant Facebook page, a number of we've got 23,000 followers, I think, on Facebook. But anymore, Facebook is just such a tough thing to get engagement with and to get things out. And really, it's pay to play. If you just post on Facebook anymore, like pretty much as a business, unless you're putting money behind it as an ad or boosted post, Facebook isn't showing it to anybody. So most of our efforts have been on video and are moving towards video. We have a couple of niche YouTube channels for a couple of like product areas that are significant to us that we do a lot of volume in, that are often even separately branded away from the business, to kind of cater to hobbyists or professionals for these kind of niches that we're in. We do have an Ernie Williamson music YouTube channel that we're kind of redoubling our efforts on right now. We've sporadically made content for it over the years, but one of our goals for 2025 is to start producing steady content. And frankly, we're taking a lot of inspiration from a local competitor that does a great job online called The Acoustic Shop. And they specialize in folk and bluegrass instruments. And all of the guys there, it's a family-owned business. It's three brothers that run this business. And two of the three brothers and their dad all used to work for me at one point. But they're very, very friendly competitors. And I wish them the best of success as they continue to grow. They're doing amazing things. And they're such friendly competitors that last year they even allowed me and my team to kind of come through and gave me the whole behind the scenes soup to nuts tour of how they do stuff. And they just do an amazing job with content production. And they've built a tremendous brand and tremendous online sales success through content production. And to me, that's clear. Like that's where you got to be going forward is doing content online. So we're going to be really heavily focused on video. I think for our products, that makes a lot of sense. So we're really kind of pivoting over towards that with the goal of trying to increase our online sales to the point where they become half of our overall sales.
And how do you structure this video content in terms of the themes of what you're discussing or showcasing on video?
Yeah, so for Ernie Williamson, for that channel, that's going to primarily be guitar reviews. And it's right now what we're thinking is, just literally just sort of showing favorite products and probably going to do a little bit of research on what series or themes we can follow. And then I have another channel that's dedicated towards high-end bass guitars, electric bass guitars. And that's also basically just a video review channel. And then I have a niche trumpet channel that isn't branded with Ernie Williamson. And in that channel, I share not only trumpet reviews, but also a lot of just thoughts and tips that I have about playing the instrument. And that channel is actually my fastest growing channel. So if I was smart, I'd probably would take what I'm doing there and apply it to the rest of the business and include more tips and things like that. Which I've been accused of a lot of things, but smart probably isn't one of them. But now that I've said it out loud, it's got me thinking like I really should do that because that trumpet channel is growing. Actually, I have the most viewers with that right now, and it's monetized and has steady engagement. And not only am I getting the most views and stuff with it, those customers are buying products from me too. So yeah, I think I just talked myself into we'll also include some tips and ideas for improving one's playing on these other channels as well.
So this is, I think, really fascinating, and I wonder if another owner's listening. What do you view video as more of a long-term play? I mean, what's the objective? Is it to capture email addresses, or are you seeing that you're actually getting sales directly through the YouTube channel?
Yeah, I see that we get sales directly through it. I make a video for a product and that product sells. And it builds our credibility and it builds community. When I go to the NAMM show, I'll have many people that will stop me because they recognize me from my YouTube channels. Wow. I'm going to go to the Trumpet Guild conference. And yeah, there's a trumpet conference. And I'll go to that in May. And when I go, there'll be people that will stop me hey, you're the Trumpet Thoughts guy. And those people make purchases. So it's the thing that I like about video content, especially YouTube. I think YouTube's still the best option for this right now, is it's very evergreen. So most things are going to be more about what's new. The algorithms are going to serve you what's new. So probably the worst for that would be maybe Twitter or Facebook. Facebook pretty much is only going to show you what's happened in the last day. Sometimes it seems like if you've loaded Facebook a couple times in a day, they'll start showing you things from the last few days, but that's basically about it. And to my knowledge, really no appreciable amount of people are using Facebook as a search engine. They're not going to Facebook and searching for things. So your posts on Facebook are really only about maybe trying to build some sense of community, maybe things where you're trying to get quick response. Hey, we're offering free introductory lessons or this, that, or the other this week only. That could be a good way to do that. Like email can also be good for that, using emails for things that are more immediate. And then when you get into things like Instagram Reels and TikTok, that will tend to be content that's fresh and then also maybe up through the last few weeks to months. And TikTok's in this weird spot right now where it's kind of halfway in between like Facebook and YouTube in terms of how users use it. So TikTok has some of the immediacy of Facebook, but it's pulling in especially once it finds out what you like or creator you like, it'll start to pull in some of that creator's older content just to try to keep you on the platform and engaged. And then YouTube definitely does that. So we're trying to put more of our efforts, and by efforts, I mean basically time, thoughts, and money on content that's a little more long-standing and evergreen. And YouTube is just kind of the king for that. Those YouTube videos, like we have videos that are over a decade old that people still watch and still comment on. And all that helps to still build our brand awareness with our consumer base, to build our credibility. And once you get to meet a few metrics, helps to build your viewer base, which you can monetize that YouTube channel and make money off of that. So YouTube is, because it's just more evergreen. We'll have people reach out for an instrument that we've reviewed, 8 years ago, and they want one like that one, and so we can either match them up with something we have or do a special order or something like that. So yeah, for us, I think that's been the key strategy. And sorry, real quick. But the other thing is YouTube is the second largest search engine. So obviously Google's number one, but then YouTube is number two. And people go to YouTube all the time to look up things for products or if they're trying to learn something. I buying a new phone. And so I went to YouTube to watch reviews. And I spent more time on YouTube than I did on websites. I bought a new laptop recently, same thing. And lots and lots of customers use YouTube for that. So we want to make sure that our product reviews and our products are on there. So when people are searching for stuff, they're seeing us. And then if we can do a good job with being fun and likable on camera, we're hoping that those customers will want to support our efforts by buying from us.
What, I know when it comes to, well, it sounds like you know a lot about social media. You've done a lot of research and you're really leaning into it. Are there, and I'm sure you've heard this too, I'm sure there are plenty of music retailers that feel like they don't have the time for social media or they're not so convinced that it's really going to help them. What would you say to those people? And do you feel that really every music store needs to be leaning in to social media, or does it make more sense with a business like yours that has these multiple revenue streams and multiple locations?
That's a great question. And it's funny because I do feel like I know a lot about social media. I feel like I haven't applied myself to it as thoroughly as I should have. And that's one of my goals for 2025 is to really take over our marketing and make it excellent. When I went to the NAMM show 2 weeks ago, I went to pretty much every marketing session to like take notes and just get inspired on how to turn on and change it. I think that question's honestly pretty easy to answer. If you're a business owner, and you've got more business than you know what to do with, and you're having to turn customers away, or you're just full, then yeah, you don't really need to do social media or any other kind of marketing. Like that's the last thing you need. Like, you're just going to bring in more business that you can't satisfy. But if you've got holes in your schedule, or if you've seen your traffic decline, if you're a retailer, then you've got to be where the customers are. And where those customers are now is online. And I think you've got to be very strategic about how you do it. I honestly think anymore, depending on kind of what platform you're thinking, I probably wouldn't put hardly any effort into Facebook. I just don't think it's really worth it. Facebook ads, if you're selling products or lesson studios, that can be probably useful. But to put a lot of time and attention and effort into building a Facebook following, to me, hasn't really seemed worth the while. I would put most of my efforts in YouTube and TikTok at this point. And maybe depending on where your customer base is at, maybe also Instagram Reels. But feels like with a lot of those meta products right now, there's certainly a lot of people that are really, really opposed to it. So I don't know. If you've got limited time and resources, YouTube and TikTok is probably where I'm spending most of my time. And I think if you need to grow your business or want to grow your business, then that's how you're going to do it. You got to go where the customers are at.
Do you feel like it's simple enough, easy enough for an owner to do themselves or delegate to an employee to learn and implement, or do you feel it makes more sense to outsource it?
Man, I don't think we can outsource it. I've tried. I've tried so many different agencies and things like that. I haven't found one that works. You find an agency that knows social media marketing, but then they don't know your business. You find someone who maybe they know your business, but then they don't know the marketing side of it, and it's very difficult. For me, that I feel like that's been like our biggest struggle is figuring out this marketing piece. I've hired multiple agencies. They haven't worked. I've tried to hire staff to do it. That hasn't worked. So that's why I'm taking it over. Now, I do, though, have friends that own, because I've got a lot of friends in the music industry from having been in it for as long as I have been. And I know some of them have been very successful at hiring people to come do it, especially hiring staff or taking an existing staff member to take over some of what they're doing. And that's worked really, really well for them. So I think that is possible. But it's got to be ultimately someone who I think it's got to be someone who's active on that platform, engaged on that platform, understands the platform and the trends, and wants to do the job. And so if you want to have someone develop a TikTok channel for you, if you personally aren't on TikTok and don't have any interest of it, and especially if you have like a bad opinion about TikTok, then you should stay away from it, because nobody wants to hear your stinking thinking on there. But if you've got employees that are on TikTok for hours a day, and they've got, uh, shoot, that's probably the only requirement. They don't even have to necessarily be fun, because I think about the people that I see on TikTok. Not all of them have these great, huge, sparkling personalities. So it takes all types of people can be successful there. You just got to know and understand the culture of that medium. Same thing with YouTube. So if there is a social media that you really particularly enjoy viewing as a user, then get out there and create your content. But if you're not a big social media fan, then find someone on your staff who is, who uses it every day and enjoys it, and have them do the content for you.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it might even make sense to even invest in them having some training to get them caught up to speed. Because
Absolutely.
I'm sure there are good agencies out there that you can delegate this, the social media aspect to, but I've heard more stories of disappointment than of success for with doing that.
I think that's exactly right. So like, I don't really use Instagram personally, but I know for millennials that's a big audience. And I know that those millennials are getting older, and they're going to start getting to the point where they got money to spend on some of the higher end instruments that we sell. So what I've done this year is I just asked our staff on chat, who of you use Instagram daily, and you not only view Instagram, but you also post? And I had about 3 or 4 guys like say, I do. And so I'm going to task those people with running our Instagram page. You guys do whatever you want with it. I don't care. But just post and engage with the platform, because I'm not going to do it. I don't have the time. And I'm not familiar with how the vibe of Instagram. So I'm going to, have them do it. But I think that makes far more sense than it does to try to hire someone from the outside, because when you hire someone from the outside, it's not cheap, and they're not inside your business. So the content's going to come across as pretty generic. They'll know all the strategies for like ad placements and how many views one should see and all that kind of stuff. And they might be a good resource to connect with when you want to do some paid placement things. But in terms of your regular content production, you got to have people that know your business and know the products in order to be able to do it. So, and the other thing you said that I just could not agree with more strongly is paying for education. By hook or by crook, invest in these people so that they learn. It's why I love going to the NAMM show. I pretty much go to every single NAMM show, and I have for 20 something years. And you'll find me most of the time in the NAMU education sessions, the Idea Center sessions. Even as long as I've been in this business and as successful as we've been, I'm still constantly going to try to learn and be inspired. I spend the vast majority of the time in those educational sessions and less time on the floor looking at product, because I need to learn more about my business and not just buy more for the business. So,
what I'd recommend for anyone who's maybe new to getting into social media, or they're reluctant to do it, or they're doing it and they're not happy with the results. And I did this recently with my own social media efforts, is I kept a spreadsheet for about a month or two. In the spreadsheet, it said, here's what the post was, here's what it said, or, here's what is happening in it. And then I kept data on how many likes it got, how many comments, and how many shares it got. And I did this for about a little over a month. And then I uploaded that data, that Excel spreadsheet, into ChatGPT and said, okay, give me some feedback as to what's working, what I should lean into, what I should avoid. And the data that it gave me was awesome. It really started spotting trends as to what people were what messages were resonating with people, and then it gave me great advice on
Mm-hmm.
future content to consider. So using ChatGPT in terms of just analyzing your content, maybe even before you post it, but then having it analyze your data can really help you be more strategic.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great tool. I mean, ChatGPT and all those various AI things have just allowed us to be able to analyze and plan and create at a faster rate than ever before.
Yeah.
And one would be silly not to utilize that because your competitors are,
Yeah.
and they're going to move faster than you are. And so, yeah, one should absolutely do that. Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, as we think about social media, I've got a friend of mine, EJ Dombrowski from Jim's Music up in Michigan and Wisconsin. He'll always ask like, well, what's the ROI on that? What's the ROI on that? And sometimes with social media, it's a little hard to definitely nail it down. But it's one of those things that when you're doing it right, you definitely can feel there's an ROI for it. And that should translate through lesson signups or through product sales or increased rentals. And it may not necessarily be that, oh, yeah, I made that one video and I sold these products. You might have that, but you might not. But you should be able to see, like, we've made this many videos and our business online has grown this way, or our in-store traffic has grown. And our customers, when they walk in, are saying, oh, yeah, I saw this online. You should have a general sense of doing that. And the one thing that I would just encourage people to notice is you can sometimes get into a spot where you're getting good engagement on your videos or good engagement on your social media content, but it's not translating to sales. And that a lot of times when we engage someone, like if we go to an AM Idea Center session and they've got a social media marketing person presenting, or we bring in a company, a lot of times they're just trying to get you like engagement and viewers and stuff like that. And really what we need is not that as much as we need people that would come into our stores or go to our websites and buy gear. And the engagement's a part of it, but you can make posts that get engagement but don't translate to sales. And so if you find yourself like, well, we're getting a lot of engagement and people comment and follow, but like no one's buying anything, then you might think about what kind of content you're putting out there. And it can be okay to do both. I think that's fine. But if you're trying to ultimately move product, you should have a sense of whether what you're doing is driving customers to your door or not.
Well, it's also striking that balance between, um, not selling all the time on social media, but then finding strategic moments to sell. And so many businesses, all they do is sell on social media, which when it comes to ads, great, that makes sense. But when it comes to content, you want engagement, but also you want to be careful not, at some point you want to ask for the sale, and
I
striking that
actually,
balance.
yeah, my hot take on that is I think it's okay to kind of sell all the time. Um, I just think that if you're going to do that, it needs to be entertaining. Uh, and so I think if you look at, like, for example, on the guitar world, if we look at Anderton's music over in the UK, or the Acoustic Shop here in Springfield, Missouri, they do a great job. Anderton's especially, pretty much everything they do, every bit of content they make is to sell product. But they'll have an hour-long YouTube video where during that time where they're featuring some product, they're having a good time doing it, and they're cracking jokes and they're playing music and they're having a lot of fun. But there's no doubt that they're there to sell guitars. Like, that's what they're trying to do. And so I think sometimes we hear the advice of like, you should have 4 or 5 non-selling posts for every selling post that you make. I just don't know that that's really accurate. I just think that whatever you do, it should be done to the point where it's entertaining. And if you're trying to sell guitars and you're going to post those on Instagram and you're going to take gorgeous photos of these guitars, that's enough. You don't have to do anything. You can post a guitar you have for sale with gorgeous photography and you will have people follow you on Instagram just for that. And you don't have to ask them which is better, rosewood or maple. Like, you don't have to get into those kinds of, clickbaity discussions. You can if you want, But you don't have to. You can sell. You just got to sell in a way that people want to be sold to and where it's entertaining and engaging, and not just come in right now. We're running a special sale for this, that, or the other. That kind of stuff doesn't work as well. People get real tired of that. But showcasing really cool products in a way that's fun and entertaining, people don't get tired of that at all.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, it's regardless of your results, look at your analytics, look at the data. That's telling you what your audience likes and what resonates with them.
Yeah.
What?
Well, like I said, look at your sales. I mean, at least that's the big thing. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Because you can have like, oh, we got good analytics, we got good engagement and everything else. Oh, how's business? Oh, it's terrible. I mean, you can totally have that. I can make posts that get tons of engagement, but it doesn't make any money. And so you just gotta kind of have that in mind. But that means that the posts you make, they've got to be fun, and they've got to be entertaining or educational. Like they've got to be something. It can't just be screaming at people to come into your store.
Well, and it's a great problem to run by ChatGPT, saying, "Look, I'm getting great engagement on social media. Here's what my posts are about. I own a music store, and my posts aren't leading to increase in revenue. What advice would you give me?" And maybe it's simply you're just not asking for the sale in your post, and at some point you got to ask for the sale.
Yeah, the thing I love about ChatGPT too, and of course at the NAMM show this year, they had so many sessions on AI, so it was very helpful to get that. But you can keep like editing that in and editing those prompts. So you put in something, and it'll give you something. You don't have to accept what it gives you. You can say, I love the idea you suggested of this, but I don't like the idea of that. What else can you suggest in lieu of that? And that's really great. The other thing that's really fantastic is you can use ChatGPT. You can use it as essentially like a strategist. So you can say, you are a world-class Instagram marketer, and you're going to help me grow my business on Instagram. I want you to ask me step by step a series of questions that will help me develop a strategy and content plan for how to grow my business on Instagram. And it will, like, one by one go through questions that you can answer. Because if you don't put that step-by-step instruction in there, it'll just dump out a page of stuff you need to do, which can be kind of overwhelming. And you'll find that some of it applies to you, but some of it doesn't. But the step-by-step thing, it'll like go through and ask you questions, and you answer those questions, and it'll tailor the next questions. I've found that bit of instruction to be so useful, in coming up with better suited content for me. That's game changer right there.
And it's like huge. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about ChatGPT, but if you're a music store owner and maybe you have an employee that you're causing you some stress, there's things maybe about them you like, but there are other aspects about them that are, you got you worried, and you're contemplating letting them go. Just go into ChatGPT as like a business partner and say, okay, here's what's going on with this employee. Here's the challenges. Here's the pluses and the cons. What advice would you give me? That is immensely helpful. I mean, you've got a sort of this built-in virtual team around you at all times to advise you, and it really, any important decision, any important email, running that through ChatGPT can really save you a lot of time and a lot of stress as well.
I agree. We use it for that all the time. I know Amanda Reuter, who's the president of Ernie Williamson Music, she will often get sensitive emails from employees or sometimes customers that are difficult topics to address, and she'll often use ChatGPT to craft the replies. And of course, she's editing that and making adjustments or whatever. But just so many times, the reply that ChatGPT is giving is more thoughtful and reasoned than what we might do. And of course, it's so much faster, doing it in seconds. Whereas we could spend 30 minutes trying to craft out the perfectly worded reply with the right tone that drives the conversation in the right direction. And like ChatGPT can do it in just like under 10 seconds. It's amazing time to be alive. I think most people that are really following this AI stuff feel like it's the next It's the next boom. It's the new internet. It's the next industrial revolution. It's the thing that, like, there's going to be time before AI and the time after AI, just like there was the time before the internet, the time before the industrial revolution. It's going to be that significant. And because of that, if you're not embracing it and hopping, like running towards it now to use it, you are doing it at your own peril. So if you're running away from it, you are running the wrong direction.
Well, and I encourage those listening who had their businesses, say in the 90s, to think back to maybe 1997, 1998, where you knew the internet was this thing that everyone was talking about, but you didn't necessarily see the need in having a website. And maybe at that point in time you didn't, but then we saw, I mean, we all got online because we had no choice, because the whole world was. And
Yep.
getting, embracing chat. Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think that AI, the impact of it, we haven't even begun to understand in terms of it being a substantial cultural shift, like we saw with the Industrial Revolution, like we saw with the explosion of the internet. And yeah, this is a really this moment in history is full of opportunity, and especially for people that are of the entrepreneurial mindset. There's a lot of
Yeah.
entrepreneurial opportunities too.
You're making a great point, Dave, because you're right. If I could go back to the 90s or the early 2000s, what would I do different? I would pour the gas on building an e-commerce site. I would do that so much faster. I remember in about 2008, I had a customer email us upset that our website was not as good as Guitar Center's website. And at that point, we had 2 locations. I remember thinking, like, what an asinine request or
Right.
demand that this little local music store in Missouri would have the same quality of website that Guitar Center has. I mean, Guitar Center probably had a marketing budget that exceeded our annual sales. But I knew right then that in the next 10 years, and I said it to so many people, in the next 10 years, customers will expect every retailer to have the same quality website as a big national chain like that. And that turned out to be right. And so I wish that if I could go back to the early 2000s, I would put the effort into building a strong e-commerce site, and I would keep that going. And I would be active I would get on, build a YouTube following right off the bat, like knowing if I knew then, knew that if could go back then and know what I know now, that's what I would do. Well, that's where you're at right now with AI. So, like, if you're not using that and embracing it, you're gonna look at yourself and go, "I wish I would have done that 20 years ago." So you get on it
Well,
now.
we were
Or it's gonna get left
dismissive
behind.
of technology.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, it's like, it's not really going to impact. When I started my music school, I'd say less than half of the families in my school even had email addresses. So I viewed email as an inconvenience. I'm like, no, I just want to mail the letter. Like, like
Yep.
only half of these, not even half, have email addresses. So right, we have to wait for the culture. I had to wait for the culture to get to a point where everybody had an email address, and I had to wait to a point that everyone even knew what a website was. But
Yep.
people, people catch up, and they catch up quickly, and it's almost impossible to comprehend life without the internet and without email now.
Of
That's how
course.
business works, and it will be the same with AI, most likely.
Exactly. You're exactly right.
So share with me, just lastly, I really want to talk a little bit about music retail podcasts. If you could just share with us how long the podcast is been running for, and what the theme is, or what the angle is of your podcast.
Sure. That's a good question on how long it's been running. I think I've done it maybe for 5 or 6 years, something like that. I have to look back to see what the first episode was. Maybe 4 or 5 years. Um, I I have that. I actually now have 4 podcasts, 2 that I've just recently started. But music retail podcast is the biggest one. Um, so that all started kind of like you. I was listening to some other. I love podcasts. I listen to them often, especially when I'm in the car or traveling or getting ready in the morning, something like that. Um, and I have a wide mixture of things I listen to, but what I mostly listen to is true crime and some like general business type stuff, and then a few like kind of niche things that I'm interested in, hobby stuff that I'm interested in. And I just found that I wasn't really happy with any of the retail focused podcasts. There was one in particular, and I won't name the person's name to protect the guilty, but there was one in particular that I felt like he had good guests and good topics, but he has a business that services retailers, and he was just constantly pitching his business all throughout. And he was such a prominent voice in his podcast, and as equal as to what the guest was. And I frankly just found that kind of annoying. And so I thought, and I was also kind of going through a bit of burnout. And so I thought, I have a bunch of connections in the music industry, but many of those connections are kind of shallow. There's like, kind of the see you at NAMM, hey, how you doing? Keep it moving, kind of, quick handshakes, how's business, and then move down the way. And so I thought, if I start this podcast, I could learn about what other people are doing in their business and kind of how it got started. I wanted to find out like what were some of their biggest failures, what were some of their biggest successes, what their strengths are, what their day-to-day looks like. And it would inspire me and give me ideas. And it would also deepen the quality of relationships I have with people in my industry. And so I started that several years ago, just as a labor of love. And that's kind of, it's grown, and I don't do it consistently because it's not really something I monetize or anything like that. But it's been such a great way to continue to build my reputation in my industry. And people listen to it, and I constantly get comments about how much people enjoy it. But I definitely got out what I wanted out of it, which was deeper connections with people in my industry, but then also inspiration. And there's several episodes that I listen to, probably I've listened to many times. I probably listen to them every other year or so, that are just good inspiration for me to get my mindset right or to challenge myself with. And
Is
so
there one
it's
in
been a really,
particular that you could share, that you
yes,
can think of to share with the listeners?
yeah. I have my favorite one. It was as an episode with uh, Gerson Rosenblum. And Gerson Rosenblum had a business, I believe in Pennsylvania, called Medley Music. And for the longest time, when I started in this industry, like in the 90s, and early 2000s, I'd often pick up a trade magazine. I'd see Gerson and Medley Music featured in this magazine, and Gerson was a NAMM board member, and he was a mover and shaker and had been very successful in the industry for a long time. And then he closed his stores, probably 10 or 15 years ago. And to me, while I didn't know Gerson, it was kind of a shock of this person who I thought was very successful and everything else completely shut down his business. And so one day at the NAMM show, I was walking the floor and I see Gerson on the floor in a conversation with someone. And I knew who he was, but of course he didn't know who I was. And I stopped, and he kind of finished this conversation and looked over to me, and I introduced myself and asked if he'd be willing to talk about the closing of his business on the podcast, and if he'd be willing to have like kind of a vulnerable conversation. And then I understood it'd be awkward, and I'd understood if he wouldn't be willing to do it. And to his credit, he said, like, I really haven't talked with anyone about it, but I'd be willing to do it. And
It's great.
that episode, he shares, of course, the history of how it started and the success they had, but he shares kind of why he ended up closing it. And really what it boils down to is fear. He got so afraid of how the market was changing and shifting on him that he started being overly conservative with how he managed his business and how he invested in his business. And that essentially got him to the point where he just got too behind in the marketplace and didn't have the energy or desire to do what would needed to be done in order to kind of reestablish what he once had. And it was that complacency and fear of taking chances and risks that essentially did him in. And he grew that business by taking risks. But at some point you start to think like, oh, I don't know about, the economy right now is so bad, or I'm worried about the invasion of e-commerce, or I'm worried about brick and mortar, or I'm worried about this, or I'm worried about the tariffs, or all things that we can all worry about. But if you sit there and like have that keep you from acting, you're going to definitely diminish your business by doing it.
Yeah.
So I listened to that episode. I've listened to it many times, and I definitely listen to it anytime I can start to feel that fear start to creep in. I listen to that, and it inspires me to go out and take chances.
So if any of you listeners are up at night, you can't sleep because you're crippled with fear about the future of your business, check out the Music
Retail Podcast
Yeah.
episode with Gerson Rosenbluth.
When I found it, it came out March 3rd, 2020. Gerson spells his name Gerson, so you can just search it.
Thank you.
And I'm looking at it on was it Apple or Spotify, but I'm sure your podcast is streaming on all the platforms.
It's on all the major platforms. Yep.
All right. Well, Donovan, I really appreciate you being on. I have one last question. How many times have people accidentally called you Ernie by mistake?
That does kind of happen every once in a while, especially when sometimes I'll let my beard kind of grow a little longer, and I do get that from time to time. So yeah, I always happy to then tell them the story, but it does happen from time to time, and especially people that what I think is funny is I'll have people will email or text our business. It's clear they've been watching my content on YouTube, where I often say my name. Hey, this is Donovan with Ernie Williamson Music. And I get so many people that will ask, like, is this Ernie? And I think, I said, no, this is Donovan. I think this is the person you're looking for. And that always cracks me up.
Well, it is a good thing your first name isn't Bert. That would bring a whole swell of hurt. All right, Donovan, thanks so much for being on and sharing your insights. And I think what you said regarding social media and AI is super interesting. And I hope it gives some of our listeners something to think about.
Yeah, me too. I hope that I can continue to use all these things we just talked about. You certainly inspired me to get off my butt and get to work. So, and hey, this is our third time doing this conversation, but I think the third time's the charm, baby. I think it was good. We got some good stuff going. So hopefully everybody else enjoys it too.
And a quick recommendation I want to make for you as well as the listeners, if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the social media tools and just social media and marketing in general, is a great podcast. It's called Marketing School. They're like 10-minute episodes, and Neil Patel is the host. That's a really great starting point for people. And then from there, you can kind of branch off.
I'm going to check it out. I'm going to add it to my podcast list as soon as we disconnect.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Donovan.
You're welcome.